But first, once again that old chestnut, nuclear power, has rolled onto the policy table and it's found a bunch of nationals willing to try to crack it open. Earlier in the week, the Australian newspaper reported as many as 2/3 of coalition MPs backed lifting the ban on nuclear energy to help shift the nation to a carbon-neutral future. Indeed, when I raised this on my radio show on Thursday morning, Senator Jim Molan phoned in to lend his voice to the cause. Now, we've heard all of this stuff before, but with Australia's coal-fired power stations ageing and renewables on the ascendancy, there is a growing sense of urgency now about which technology can provide the reliable baseload power Australia needs if coal's to go. It's an issue of sovereignty and of national security. Now, I'm not advocating that we abandon coal. What I am saying is that if the anti-fossil fuel brigade remain in the ascendancy of the energy debate, that our economy has a realistic, proven and dispatchable alternative to keep the lights on, and at this stage, the batteries just don't cut it. Now, Australia sits on one of the world's greatest uranium deposits. We have a stable geology, vast unused spaces suitable for waste storage and capable scientific minds. And for those concerned about the safety issue, I suppose the Chernobyl syndrome, the reassuring fact is today's modern reactors are a very different beast to those of Soviet 1972. Furthermore, the political and cultural mindset, which was as much to blame for the reactor's meltdown in 1986, is thankfully absent here. Indeed, the nuclear story is evolving, and the development of small modular reactors may well be the new frontier. At this stage, the only inhibitors really are time and cost. Now, I'm told it will take a decade, probably two, to get a nuclear industry up and running in Australia. And many of our baseload coal generators, as you know, are due to shut before then. Put simply, we've wasted decades with silly moratoriums, and we may well pay the price. Speaking of price, the Hinkley C 3200 megawatt reactor in the UK may give us a bit of a guide. Now, it's currently under construction. Estimated price tag, north of £20 billion. That's over 36 billion Aussie dollars. Obviously, such a price tag will scare government. Of course, all the talk about a uranium or thorium-powered future is academic until Australia lifts the moratorium on nuclear energy generation. Now, Scott Morrison should take the lead, legislate to lift the ban, and then let's look at the economics of nuclear. All right, well, let's bring in the panel. Sam, first to you. What do you make of it?
Look, I love that we're examining the issue, but unfortunately for me, the numbers just don't stack up. The numbers, firstly, on the economics of it. So right now, we've got about $88 per megawatt hour. That's what it currently is in the state of New South Wales. Nuclear, if you were to bring in a reactor tomorrow, nuclear is about $140 to $180 per megawatt hour. That kills any manufacturing industry that you could possibly hope for. And to the timing point, again, that's you raised that, but it's a good one. So at the moment, there's a 20-year lag time of getting one of these things up. But that's best case scenario.
Probably at least.
At least. When you think that it took us 8 years to build a light rail down the George Street, central George Street of Sydney, my God, you think we can, in double that time, get a nuclear reactor built somewhere? And then somewhere is the point. Where are we going to build this thing? Now, I don't want to dive into the NIMBY.
Don't do NIMBY, Sam.
I don't want to be a NIMBY.
Don't do NIMBY.
But I genuinely don't want one of these things in my backyard, right?
The good news, John Barilaro will have one in his. But Liz, let's ask you on this. I mean, what's your take on nuclear? Sam touches on what I said. One of the problems here, of course, is cost.
Yeah, look, there's no denying the upfront costs, since we're starting from scratch, especially here in Australia, are astronomical if we were to get nuclear off the ground. But I'm actually all for it, and I only wish the Howard government hadn't just placed a moratorium back in the day on any prospect of nuclear in the country. And I do think that it's wrong that we still have that moratorium in place. We're the only G20 country with a moratorium on nuclear. We know that half the world's population uses nuclear. Over 10% of electricity worldwide is thanks to nuclear. And I think in Australia we have still quite this antiquated understanding. People were maybe still a little bit worried about it. And I think that's why we haven't seen any government have the fortitude of instituting nuclear in Australia, which is a sad and sorry thing, because there is no denying this is the gold standard of power in the 21st century. It's whether it's reliability, sustainability, affordability, not the upfront costs, but otherwise it's extremely, extremely powerful power we're talking about. You can't go past nuclear. And as we know, also its capacity is through the roof, 93.5% compared to coal, which of course we love and use a lot, but coal's capacity is in the low 40%. So honestly, I wish we'd got it off the ground ages ago. I think it should definitely still be on the cards, thinking of generations down the road.
Yeah, well, all right. Thank you, Liz. Catherine, to you. I mean, the ultimate point is the end point I raised, isn't it? First, if we're to go anywhere down this road, we've got to lift the moratorium. And then we can start having an adult conversation about whether this is actually feasible or not.
Look, Michael, up front, let me say I'm in violent agreement with you on all the points you raised, and I respectfully disagree with Sam on the cost argument, because I think it's not an arid econometric modelling argument. The fact is, can we afford not to do this? If we're serious about reducing net emissions, and if you accept the arguments of those who make arguments about fossil fuels, this is the only sustainable way forward. Renewables are heavily subsidised. That's, the cost benefit of wind farms and renewables. It's just, this is absurd to think we're going to achieve a 2050 target of any description using renewables. The politics is the hard bit. Your point is well made also, that stable geological storage of waste products in Australia, that in fact could be an industry importing that from the rest of the world. We've got uniquely good, absolutely. We can actually do that better than anywhere in the world, because we've got the most seismically stable geology on the planet. But on the broad point of the politics, you'd have to amend, as I understand it, the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Act to even take this forward. That will need cross-bench support in the Senate, which I fear won't happen. And I'm a little concerned at the PM's timidity, in that he said he'll only do it with bipartisanship from Labor. And while there were a couple of ALP voices raised in broad support of the debate on Friday, when Bridget McKenzie and Matt Canavan and the others really put it into play, it's just not realistic. Labor has got a very deep cultural objection to this. The party would split at its national conference next month. Watch if it even gets on the agenda paper. There will be people carried out screaming, and Catherine, Twitter will go berserk.
Catherine, I don't disagree with your point at all on the nuclear waste storage issue. I agree. We should be the site somewhere way out in the middle of the outback, where it is
absolutely
in the middle of a tectonic plate. It's safe. We're a geopolitically safe place. Absolutely agree. And okay, let's just put aside the economic point. I don't know how we do that. I don't know where we find the cheeky $20 billion down the back of the couch, but, let's put that to one side. How do you get over the time frame? I mean, we've got a 10-year horizon where over the next 10 years, half of our coal-fired power plants, they're going to be gone. They're going to be well and truly past their use-by date. We're going to have this critical infrastructure problem now. Now, we can, in that time, get a gas-fired power plant up and running, which is something that I've espoused the whole way through. Let gas be that firming technology to allow the wind farms and the solar panels and whatnot. But surely we've got to do better to figure out what that gap is when these coal-fired power plants that are now 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, to figure out what we're going to do with that gap.
I totally agree with you, Sam, but we're on a partisan fault line here, and I've lived in Labor Party politics myself in another lifetime and generation, and as a Labor supporter, the Labor Party just can't embrace this and can't even have the discussion. They can't have a discussion about this, and that is the big drag on any sense of bipartisanship. So,
I'm sorry, I have to disagree. The AWU, which is the largest group in the right politically, which is a big chunk of the Labor Party, they're in furious agreement with you. They want to go ahead tomorrow. Dan Walton's written op-ed saying as much.
All right, so, OK, you've challenged me on nuclear, I'll challenge you on renewables. You tell me how we get to zero net emissions without shutting down all forms of fossil fuel in Australia and deindustrialising Australia. Sure. And also giving our agricultural sector a massive haircut, which they've already taken, while city emissions go up by 30%.
Absolutely.
Since the 1990 baseline.
The key is to what you said, net. It's net. Now, for starters, I don't think we need to get down to zero net emissions. I think that's.
I'm pleased to hear you say that. That's good.
I think that's a nice aspirational goal, but I think we can do a lot of good on the path down there. But the answer is net. You don't need to deindustrialise and stop all forms of agriculture and all forms of industry. You need to figure out ways to offset the emissions that you are putting out there, and you do that through land care management. You do that through taking care of our natural environment and you know, that sort of stuff. You don't have to live in a dark pre-industrial hole somewhere.
OK. But what picks up your baseload from renewables? What actually guarantees the baseload?
Gas can turn on within 15 minutes. The problem with coal is you need those coal-fired power plants to stay on. They don't get closed down. Gas can be turned on in 15 minutes. You can have it up and running, and you know the grid firmed up. So if you see that you're approaching peak capacity for the grid, and you know demand is there and the supply is just not coming in, you can turn this thing on within 15 minutes. You know.
But you've got to have the gas, and the part of the problem is, say, in the Labor state of Victoria, there's virtual moratorium on gas extraction, and so again,
100%.
Theoretically, yes, gas could work, but if the premiers don't come to the party, there ain't no gas to pump.
Sure. So I guess there's a critical point on that, right? We are the largest gas exporter in the world. Yeah. In the world, bar none.
We're a big uranium exporter too.
Sure. But Qatar comes second, but we kill every other person. You know, we're the only place in the world that doesn't have any kind of domestic gas reservation scheme.
Except in the West.
What do you mean, except
Western
in the West?
Australia.
Sorry, you're absolutely right. Western Australia does, but for mainland eastern seaboard, we have nothing. Yeah. Now, I cannot believe that you can open up a gas well in, say, the Hunter Valley. You can pump this gas out. Well, you can't actually get it out of the Hunter Valley, but you can do it in Queensland. You can get it out of a port without any recourse to selling it to local manufacturers, local industry. I think that's crazy.
It is.
And right now, gas prices are at record lows. It would be a much better and more productive debate for the government to go out there and buy up 10, 20, 30 years of these licences at super cheap rate and sell them to Australian industry, sell them to Australian manufacturers.
Or maybe get the Belt and Road Initiative to bring it to Victoria, mate. That might be the way forward.
Well said, Catherine.